I am an African.
Welcome to the second part of a three-part series on South Africa, a special series on South Africa. South Africa votes in its seventh general election since the end of apartheid 30 years ago. We look at the foreign policy of South Africa from Robert Mugabe to Israel and Palestine with our special guest, Keanen Isaacs, who is a researcher at the South African History Online, who's also a master's student at Witwatersrand University in Gauteng.
I am an African.
Now we're going to look at South Africa's foreign policy. South Africa as a regional, continental, a global actor, perhaps. South Africa during apartheid was quite vilified. Well, some did support apartheid. It's not that everyone found apartheid disgusting. But South Africa is known now, for this taking Israel to the International Criminal Court, first for genocide, and then recently to stop the assault on the Rafah area of Gaza. So just to sort of draw back a bit, post-apartheid South African foreign policy, what is it about, and what are they trying to do? What's been their brand, essentially, in the last 30 years, if you give an overall?
Yeah, so following the country's first democratic election in 1994 with the ascent of the ANC, South Africa's re-entry into the international community after years of isolation and of boycotting the apartheid regime in South Africa. South Africa's re-entry has been one of promoting and advancing human rights issues all across the world. The late Nelson Mandela played a role in settling disputes between the United States, the UK, and Libya. And basically, Mandela reintegrated South Africa into the international community and restoring a positive image of South Africa institutions like the United Nations and the Southern African Development Community.
Or SADC.
Yes. But during the tenure of President Mbeki, South Africa retained a mostly continental outlook, with Mbeki administration advocating the philosophy of African Renaissance, which was articulated in his famous I Am an African speech at the University of Cape Town in 1997, which celebrated the adoption of a new South African constitution.
I am an African. I owe my being to the hills and the valleys, the mountains and the glades, the rivers, the deserts, the trees, the flowers, the seas, and the ever-changing seasons that define the face of our native land. My body has frozen in our frosts and in our latter-day snows. It has thawed in the warmth of our sunshine and melted in the heat of the midday sun. The crack and the rumble of the summer thunders, lashed by startling lightning, have been a cause both of trembling and of hope. The fragrances of nature have been as pleasant to us as the sight of the wild blooms of the citizens of the veld. The dramatic shapes of the Drakensberg, the soil-colored waters of the Lekwa, Iqeli, Notugel, and the sands of the Kalahari have all been panels of the set on the natural stage on which we act out the foolish deeds of the theater of the day. At times, and in fear, I have wondered whether I should concede equal citizenship of our country to the leopard and the lion, the elephant and the springbok, the hyena, the black mamba, and the pestilential mosquito. A human presence among all of these, a feature on the face of our native land just defined, I know that none dare challenge me when I say I am an African. I am the grandchild of the warrior men and women that in Kukuni land. Patriots at Tetwayo and Mpepu took to battle. The soldiers Mushweshwe and Gumunyane taught never to dishonor the cause of freedom. I am the child of Nongause. I am he who made it possible to trade in the world markets in diamonds, in gold, and the same food for which our stomachs yearn. Being part of all of these people, and in the knowledge that none dares contest that assertion, I shall claim that I'm an African. Today, it feels good to be an African.
Basically, the philosophy of African Renaissance emphasizes the idea of providing African solutions to African problems. Mbeki also, like his predecessor, mediated in a political dispute in Ivory Coast following the election there, which had which led to the emergence of two disputing leaders, with both claiming to be the president. Obviously, the situation had the potential for violence, and Mbeki mediated during that dispute there. During the Zuma era, most South Africa joined Brazil, Russia, India, and China, which then became the BRICS bloc, representing the five fastest growing economies of the world. But during the Zuma era, South Africa increased its relations with China. Now, from Mandela's era to up until the Zuma administration, there has been the idea of promoting human rights and democratic values. However, during the Zuma administration's tenure, there's a slippage in SA's commitment to human rights and Ubuntu as enshrined in the African Constitution.
Yeah.
And some key events happened during the Zuma era that could speak to this. So one of it is the Marikana massacre,
Yeah,
in which police opened fire on unarmed workers during a weeks long protest led by the lawmen, platinum miners, demanding a increase in the salaries. Another is the Omar Al Bashir
Omar Al Bashir, the Sudanese
yes.
president.
So the International Criminal Court ordered an arrest warrant for the former president of Sudan, Omar Al Bashir, who was wanted for war crimes in the Darfur region.
Yeah.
So he was expected to attend the African Union summit in South Africa in 2015, and South Africa was then ordered by the ICC to arrest and detain Omar Al Bashir. However, many say that he was helped, and he then left the country in a rush, basically still evading the ICC. Following the backlash, South Africa decided that it will withdraw from the International Criminal Court. However, one of the courts in the country ruled that um, this couldn't happen, and however, South Africa is still in discussions of basically it's part of a larger debate on reforming
Yeah,
multilateral international institutions like the United Nations and
yeah,
the WTO, and then obviously now we have the International Criminal Court,
yeah,
and as you rightly mentioned, what has caught the attention of the international community recently is the criminal proceedings at the International Court of Justice.
the ICJ,
So the
right?
ICJ is so following Hamas surprise attack on Israel on the 7th of October in 2023. Israel then responded with a massive air and ground assault the into the Gaza Strip, which has killed at least close to 36,000
Mm,
Palestinians, half of them being women and children, which
yeah,
has basically caused tensions in the region, in the entire Middle East region, to flare up. So, yeah, and I think we can use that as a segue into the Ramaphosa administration's foreign policy, which which happened, which is basically against the backdrop of increased rivalry between the United States, and this administration has faced a lot of criticism due to its approach to the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, and the latest escalation of hostilities between the state of Israel and
yeah,
Palestine.
yeah. I was
Yeah,
just going to
so,
say, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
no, you can you can carry on.
Yeah, no, because I was going to point out, this human rights type of foreign policy is very, like when you set very high principles for yourself, you also you have to pay a very high cost as well, to your sort of diplomatic relations. And you have relationships with China, you have situations that aren't, where there's serious human rights concerns from, various bodies, the sort of Uyghur Muslims, you have the issue of Hong Kong, and
Yes,
people sort of expected
Taiwan.
South Africa to stand up with Taiwan as well. South Africa hasn't. In Russia, as you said, the effective annexation of large swaths of Ukraine, South Africa hasn't stood up to that one. Um,
Yes,
and then when it comes to Israel, to Gaza, and that was the main point that Israel was bringing, that they're not following through. But of course, it doesn't hide the fact that it is a massive onslaught of many that you said, of course, are women and children. Um, so on one hand, it's sort of the champion of human rights, but at the same time, it's trying to make itself a global South champion. And we actually even had a fun question from one of our listeners, and they asked, why does Ramaphosa hate Israel so much? And I think that's where it's sort of coming from, where it looks like a bit of a double standard. Um, so there's that question. But then my question also is the Ramaphosa's position on Ukraine and Russia and the mediation that he sent through. Um, was it grandstanding, or is there anything tangible that's coming from there? Because on the face of it, it looks like, okay, Africa is making a move. It's part of the G20. It's a global actor, but almost a year later, not much.
mm.
Yeah.
I think the mediation team led by President Ramaphosa and a few other African heads of states and officials is is a is a noble initiative. However, the trip itself was marked by problems. I think one of it was that um, South African diplomats weren't allowed to to get off the plane in, I think it was Poland.
Ukraine. Oh, Poland,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, in Ukraine. But obviously they were stuck in Poland
Yes.
for some reason. Apparently there was an issue with a firearm. And then while they were in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, there was a Russian attack. However, the problem is when this team, basically mostly on the South African side, when they were questioned about the attack in Kiev, one of them said, "We didn't hear about any attack. We never heard any missiles."
Mm.
So just not to upset, the Russians, South Africa's participation in a 10-day joint naval exercise with the Russian and Chinese navies, throwing criticism from Western military experts and opposition political parties. Continuing with the Russia-Ukraine conflict in May 2023, U.S. Ambassador to South Africa Ruben Brigitte claimed the sanctioned that a sanctioned Russian ship, the Lady R, docked at the naval base in Simonstown, was loaded with arms destined for Russia. The
So South
ambassador's
Africa was
allegation,
giving arms to
obviously,
Russia.
yes, that was the Lady R saga. The ambassador's allegations caused international controversy, with many ANC government officials calling for the ambassador to be expelled. Um, the investigation into the Lady R saga domestically itself as being considered by many as just something that as a formality, but with no real
No real results.
investigative. After the findings of the commission, I still believe that there are more questions than answers.
Mm.
There's
So the
also
commission,
I think there's a open secrets investigation
yeah,
on a special unit of the South African military that one of their vehicles was pictured at the naval base when the Lady R docked, but then they were stationed a few meters away from the entry into the base itself.
yeah.
But under the cover of night, these vehicles then move to the quay where the ship was docked, and something was offloaded and something was unloaded.
Mm.
So apparently the South African government ordered ammunitions from Russia. This was allegedly before COVID-19. However, due to the global supply constraints and trade being disrupted during the COVID-19 lockdowns, especially in China, there was obviously so they claim
It was an old
it was
shipment.
that shipment that was ordered before COVID that had now arrived.
Yeah.
But it's the timing of all of it which raises us suspicions.
Mm. But my question is, what's the, in international relations, every state is, even though they are virtuous human rights advocates, what is the interest of South Africa in all of these things? How is it beneficial to South Africa? Like, apartheid South Africa was very good friends with Israel, even with their
Yes.
nuclear armaments and so on. That was for, you could kind of see what the interest was, okay, to defense and so on, because they had wars. But right now, what is the interest of South Africa to, I don't know if they recognize, I think they recognize Palestine as a state and the PLO, but I don't know about their relationship with Hamas.
Yes.
What is their interest there? One, taking them to court, and what is also the interest in siding with Russia? How is it beneficial to South Africa as a country or the ANC, the ruling sector?
Yes. I think as you rightly mentioned, the idea of any foreign policy is how is a government strategy in dealing with other nations, usually to maximize benefits in the national interest. When it comes to Russia, um, there's no real economic advantage. Russia is one of South. I think they in terms of hierarchy, they are like 40th. So not even in the top 10 countries that South Africa trades with. Also, the amount of money Russia has invested in South Africa pales in comparison to the amount of money the United States and the European Union has invested into South Africa, which has led to key infrastructure developments. South Africa's relationship or perceived relationship with Russia stems from the Soviet Union's support for the ANC during the struggle for liberation and during the apartheid struggle
Yeah.
with the Soviet Union actively training and supplying liberation fighters. So I believe that the ANC post 1994 still maintains this close relationship to Russia as like kind of like a big brother, you know.
Yeah.
But South
Yeah.
Africa's relationship under the ANC led government is, like I said, it's not one of strategic importance, but or of economic importance, but one that is historical and emotional.
And that's an interesting one because even Thabo Mbeki was given a lot of sort of, many people complained about how Thabo Mbeki was dealing with Zimbabwe, the issue of Robert Mugabe.
Yes.
Even Mandela was also criticized for it as well. The expulsion. I mean, we've done an episode on Zimbabwe already. But most of the pariah notion of Mugabe came around the land reform in the 2000s and the human rights violations during election. Although there were numerous human rights atrocities in the 80s as well. But anyway, South Africa, even on the African continent, is sort of falling short of this human rights foreign policy agenda. So could you link that as well also to the historical, in the case of Zimbabwe?
Zimbabwe is it's like the one of South African policy experts most used case study. I think South Africa didn't want to get involved into the domestic politics of Zimbabwe too much. Even with the recent election, there were
2020.
also allegations of in Zimbabwe there were also allegations of fraud and not being a free and fair election. Basic and with South African election observers even in the country, basically South Africa swept all these allegations under the rug and
basically still sees the Mnangagwa administration as the legitimate government in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, and then my last question on South African foreign policy is xenophobia on the continental. There's this talk of Africa having a permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council, and obviously one of the front runners is South Africa. Because of the economic might, political history, to act on what it says, and also the global presence that South Africa is increasingly having. Now, how can South Africa, especially even in the BRICS now, it was before this expansion, it was the only African member, and in the G20, it was also a frequent guest. But how does South Africa position itself as the speaker of Africa when it is quite infamous for xenophobia domestically.
Yeah, I think it was during the like I mentioned, during the presidencies of Mbeki and President Zuma, where where xenophobic violence increased. I think the role of the South African media in kind of creating this economic scapegoat also to distract away from the failures of the ruling party, the ANC, highlighting the inaction of many other players in the country, like civil society and the private sector.
Yeah.
You know, to
Yeah.
I think if President Zuma said anything nearly academic, is that he said that many a times criminal elements use the excuse of you know African the jobs of South Africans are being taken by foreign nationals, and yeah, Zimbabweans and Somalians. However, you see, sometimes this is just used, as an excuse to conduct criminal activity. And also, when we look at the actual figures, there aren't that many foreign immigrants in the country. So this idea of foreign African immigrants, taking the jobs and the resources, is something that's also been over exaggerated.
Okay.
By politicians themselves as well, who use this to push an agenda and to basically influence their voting base.
Okay. No, I think that's a good way to explain the sort of, the link between domestic issues and the foreign issues. I think we have run down the full extent of South African foreign policy then and now, and sort of this human rights / global South champion type of structure.
I still wanted to add, if I could,
Sure.
on South Africa and Palestine.
Yeah.
So,
Please.
like I mentioned, South Africa's post-apartheid relationship with Russia is influenced by that historical emotional ties that were established during the struggle for liberation. Now, those same ties were established with Palestinian Liberation Organization, and then later the Palestinian Authority, which is seen as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. So I think it's in that famous town hall debate, Mandela was invited, yes, and he was criticized for the company he keeps. Yasser Arafat, Colonel Gaddafi, yes, and then that is the one where he famously said, that is the mistake many political analysts make, which is to believe South Africa's enemies is the enemies of the West, or Africa's enemies is the enemies of the West. That is the speech in which he also famously said that the freedom of South Africans is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians.
Here is a set of extracts from the famous town hall in New York City, hosted by Ted Koppel of ABC Networks. In this extract, Mandela is not the president of the African National Congress Party, nor is he yet the president of South Africa. This was in 1990, the year in which he was released. Nelson Mandela was setting out his views on the Israel-Palestine relations, as well as the position of a post-apartheid South Africa.
Those of us who share your struggle for human rights and against apartheid have been somewhat disappointed by the models of human rights that you have held up since being released in jail. You've met over the last 6 months 3 times with Yasser Arafat. Are these your models of leaders of human rights? And if so, would you want a Gaddafi or an Arafat or a Castro to be a future president of South Africa?
One of the mistakes which some political analysts make is to think that their enemies should be our enemies. Our attitude towards any country is determined by the attitude of that country to our struggle. Colonel Gaddafi, Fidel Castro support our struggle to the hilt. They do not support it only in rhetoric. They are placing resources at our disposal for us to win this fight. As far as Yasser Arafat is concerned, I explained to Mr. Sidney that we identify with the PLO because just like ourselves, they are fighting for the right of self-determination.
And we are back once.
Because I have had the discussions with them, and those discussions will reach consensus. But there are matters, of course, in which we did not agree. But the position which we take as the ANC, I thought we were able to explain it in such a way that it removed the concern of the Jewish community.
Let's broaden it out.
I am still prepared to do that even in this talk. If the Jewish leader have any doubts about our stand, I am prepared to address them and to allay their concern, because they are a very important community both in South Africa and, of course, in the States. And I'm prepared to iron out any differences that might exist. But they must know what our stand is. Arafat is a comrade in arms, and we treat him as such. We have many Jews, members of the Jewish community in our struggle, and they have occupied very top positions. But that does not mean to say that the enemies of Israel are our enemies. We refuse to take that position. You can call it being political or a moral question, but for anybody who changes his principles depending on whom he is dealing, that is not a man who can lead a nation. Apparently, Mr. Coppel, you have not listened to my argument. If you have done so, then you have not been serious in examining it. I have replied to one of our friends here that I have refused to be drawn into the differences that exist between various communities inside the USA. You have not commented that I am going to offend anybody by refusing to involve myself in the internal affairs of the USA, of the USA. Why are you so keen that I should involve myself in the internal affairs of Cuba and Libya?
No.
I expect you to be consistent I don't know if I have paralyzed you.
No.
And that is a quote that is widely used by pro-Palestinian groups. But in that same speech, he also said that he does not foresee Israel withdrawing if Arab states do not recognize Israel within secure borders.
Yeah.
And I think it's important also to note that before the recent outbreak of hostilities between the state of Israel and Palestine, there was a period, although albeit brief, of normalization between the state of Israel and other Arab states.
Yeah.
So basically, in 2020, under the administration of President Trump, the state of Israel normalized diplomatic relations with United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Bahrain, and Morocco, and then Sudan followed later as well. And these agreements, these series of agreements, are largely known as the Abraham Accords.
Yeah. As I was mentioning, South Africa's support for Palestine stems from historical perspective, which is when the Palestinian Liberation Organization also supported the struggle for liberation here in South Africa with the PLO placing resources at the ANC's disposal. I think that is one of the things President Mandela also said in his town hall speech in the United States. It was not one of rhetoric, but they actually put arms in the ANC's hands, or at least controversies where it's also in the same attitude of promoting and defending human rights across the globe. But as I mentioned, South Africa's non-aligned position as obviously with the Russia-Ukraine conflict has come under criticism, and now South Africa's undivided, unequivocal support for Palestine has also been criticized. So I think in South Africa's case against Israel at the International Court of Justice, when the ICJ made provisional rulings, there was a point in there that was not highlighted by South Africa, which is the release of the almost 130 Israeli and foreign hostages still being held by Hamas.
Yeah. So
So that highlights the discrepancy between South Africa's approach to the Russia-Ukraine conflict and South Africa's approach to Israel and Palestine.
Yeah.
While at the same time, they are escalating conflicts on the continent as well. In Eastern DRC, and the fighting which broke out in April last year between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces led by Muhammad Dagalo, who was also hosted not too long ago by President Ramaphosa in the union buildings, who's also been accused of human rights abuses and atrocities in the Darfur region. So another
issue.
Another mark on the Ramaphosa administration's foreign policy.
Yeah. And you know, it's good that you have mentioned the sort of African conflicts, because in all of this Ukraine and war and the war on Gaza, there is also a lot going on here in Africa. There's the Cabo Delgado situation. South Africa sent troops there. In Samin,
Yes.
South Africa also has, there was the East African Force, which now left, and now Sami DRC, which Ramaphosa sent, is it 2,000, 2,900 troops?
Yes, it's around 2,000 troops.
Mm.
However, this has also drawn criticism back home.
Yeah, I was just going
because
to ask, can South Africa afford these missions? And
no,
expand.
the honest question, the honest answer is no.
Mm.
The South African National Defence Force has experienced budget cuts over the last few years, and this has basically undermined the the capabilities and the operational mandate of the South African National Defence Force. However, besides these foreign deployments, the South African military is overstretched by deployments in the country as well. So following multiple sabotage attempts on South Africa's power stations, and ahead of the general elections, the South African National Defence Force has been deployed inside the borders of the country once again.
Wow. So deployments domestically, deployments abroad, and then
yes, overstretching already underfunded underfunded military, which is facing weak morale. Recently, at least I think 2 to 5 of our soldiers died in the DRC.
Yeah. And that's sort of the cost of such large deployments. But at the same time, people would ask, if not them, then who? And that's the same question with Kenya's deployment to Haiti.
Yes.
It's very controversial, costly. Although Kenya is being paid, South Africa is not being paid. I don't think they are.
Yes.
It's mostly their money.
But not to bash South Africa in its relations with the larger African community. During South Africa's 3 terms in the UN Security Council, it was partially successful in advocating the African agenda. So most notably,
sorry, for our audience, South Africa was part of a non-permanent seat in the UN Security Council.
Yes, yes.
Seats. Yeah, okay, you can continue.
Yes, so during South Africa's 3 terms in the UN Security Council, it had some partial success in advocating the African agenda, highlighting peace and security issues on the continent. But most notably, South Africa advocated for the UN financing of African Union peace support operations using UN assist contributions. Yes, resolution 1709, and then there were a number of other resolutions that were passed, most notably resolution 2368 in 2016, and then 2347 in 2017, and most notably the latest one was resolution 2719, which basically gives permission for which basically sets the stage for the use of UN assist for the UN financing of African Union peace support operation using UN assist contributions. So South Africa hasn't completely forgotten, the African agenda and promoting and highlighting African peace and security issues.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, we have done a full comprehensive analysis of South African foreign policy. So for those that are watching on this particular episode, this is a 3 series on basically South Africa's democracy in the last 30 years. And the next episode is on the elections, the May 29 elections.
Say